Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining our MAPS 4 Citizens Advisory Board meeting for February 2nd, 2023. First order of business, item under 2 is A, approval of minutes of the January 5th, 2023 MAPS 4 Citizens Advisory Board meeting. The minutes were included in your packet. Does anybody have any additions or corrections? Otherwise, I take a motion and a second to approve as presented. Well, sure. Okay, we have a motion. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to item B. Receive the MAPS 4 monthly financial report ending December 31st, 2022.
Madam Chair, you have in your packet the monthly financial report, as you said, ending 12/31/2022. On the revenue side, for a total of the month of $12,662,911, fiscal year of $74,228,914, and for a total of $335,381,534. I want to point out that we are now 1.2% above collections target. Excuse me.
Love that.
On the expenditure side for the month, $554,049, fiscal year of $2,158,572, and total of $103,400,738. I'll try to answer any questions if you have any.
Do we have any questions of Mr. Todd today? Okay. If not, I would take a motion in a second to receive the report.
I'll move.
Okay. We have a motion. We have a motion in a second. Jessica. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Thank you. Okay. Now we'll move on to item 2C. Recommend receipt of consultant review committee report and authorizing negotiation of an architectural services contract with Bacchus Payne Associates Architects for the MAPS 4 Youth Centers programming and planning. Mr. Todd.
So this is consultant selection, as by now you all have seen and participated in, and Bacchus Payne is recommended for the project, and this comes with the approval of the subcommittee.
Okay. Any questions? Comments? Okay. If not, I would take a motion in a second. Okay.
Second.
Motion second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to item 2D, recommend approval of MAPS 4 homelessness program operating agreement among the Oklahoma City Property Authority, the City of Oklahoma City, and the Oklahoma City Housing Authority.
So this is an agreement for the operations of the homelessness program. Remember, there's roughly $55 million set up for this homelessness program. It's broken into 5 allocations that we'll talk about here in a minute, but this is the operating agreement of just how that will function. Jason Cotton is going to help me out here today and hit some high points on this agreement. So, Jason.
Hello,
Thank
Jason.
you, David.
It's been a while since you've been in.
Yeah, good morning,
before
everyone.
us.
Thank you for having me this morning. I have seen a few of you this week, but those that I haven't, Happy New Year. Feels a little weird saying that in February, but I hope everybody had a good break and a good holiday. So as David mentioned, we really, we have 2 items on the agenda today. They're kind of companion items. So the first item is the operating agreement, which I'm going to try to speak to a little bit. Ian Colgan with the Oklahoma City Housing Authority, I think, is going to get up after me and talk a little bit more about the next item. But I really I think with this presentation more than anything else, and David, if you have anything you want to add, feel free as we're going through this. But I felt like it made sense to really kind of return back to the resolution. And it's been the thing that occurred to me, I think, in the last week is like it's been a long time since we've talked about this project publicly. And so it felt appropriate to go back and give everybody some context and kind of remind everybody how we got here. And so obviously the first place to start would be with the resolution. So summer of 2019, I think we've all read the resolution. You guys have probably not read it as many times as I have, but certainly everyone's familiar with it. You can see on this slide that we've prepared really a lot of the language that's in that resolution. Obviously, there was this intent to transform the city's approach to reducing and potentially eliminating homelessness. There is language which talks to affordable housing, this idea of a housing first strategy, which really just reduces a lot of barriers to entry. There's items in the resolution related to the leveraging of funds. At the time the resolution was passed, it was $50 million. We now know it's more than that, but certainly the resolution speaks to how those funds would be leveraged to create additional investment for these projects. And then lastly, it talks about the need for an operating agreement before any of those things can happen. And so that's really why we're here today, is to check that box and get this thing on down the road. So summer of, I guess it was fall of 21, we finished the implementation plan. I'm bringing this, I've brought this with the presentation today just to remind everyone the way that we originally structured this project. It was envisioned to be a series of 5 allocations. You know, I think one thing I would say, generally the green boxes that you see, we call those pre-design phases. Those are the steps that we take to hire consultants and enter into agreements and things. One thing that we found out after the implementation plan was issued is that the entities that potentially would be responding to this really needed to have an understanding of when they could anticipate funding from the program. So as we were developing the RFP, it became apparent to us that we needed to provide some flexibility in that regard. And so the RFP that we issued gave respondents the opportunity to provide a plan for one of these allocations or all of these allocations. And so the operating agreement that you're seeing today is really to cover all 5 of these allocations. That's the intent. The agenda item that is going to appear behind this is actually the first of these allocations, and is just a little bit more detail on how those funds will be used in that first phase of work. So really just a point of clarification. The implementation plan schedule, because of the way that we structured it to provide some flexibility to the city, it also seems to imply that there's going to be 5 operating agreements. That is not the case. There will be 1 operating agreement, and that's what we're here to discuss today. So I've included here the updated budgets. I'm sure you all remember, we did a budget adjustment in the fall of last year. And so the budgets were increased by about 10%, and so those are the numbers that you see there that we've allocated to each one of these phases of work. So that's really the implementation plan. Just a little bit of history on how we got here. So in the fall of 21, we started preparing the RFP that came before this board for approval. We issued it late in that fall. We actually issued the RFP, and then in February we received a response from the Oklahoma City Housing Authority. They were the only one that responded. It was a very good response, very thorough. In the spring of last year, April to May, we had several meetings with the Housing Authority to talk with them to really get a better understanding of their approach to executing this work. I'm going to tell you it's a really complicated financial package, and so it took some time to sit down. I think we spent about 3 to 5 hours with the Housing Authority really just talking about how they intended to execute these projects. And so we did that in the spring. In the late summer, really all the way until last month, we were working through the operating agreement and the details of that agreement. This is a very unusual agreement, I think, as when you compare it to other MAPS operating agreements. You know, we're not building a senior health and wellness center, we're not building a youth center, and so it's a little bit of a different animal, and so it's really taken some time, I think, on the city's part, the Housing Authority's part, to really come to an agreement that everyone was comfortable with. It took a lot of support from Laura's office, Laura McDevitt's office, and so I think that it obviously just took us some time to get through that, and so we're happy today to bring that forward. The Oklahoma City Housing Authority, actually, their board received this draft agreement, or this final agreement, on I think Monday of this week. Ian can speak to that in a minute, but they have approved the agreement, and so it's really coming to this board for your consideration, obviously, to go on to council so we can get this thing buttoned up and moving down the road. Before I go on, any questions? You want me to just keep marching on?
I think keep moving.
Okay, so I have spent a lot of time with the Housing Authority. I'm really just going to hit the high points. I think Ian and their group can go into a lot more detail, but really, as they looked at the RFP and put together their response, really this was their vision for the program. And, you know, I think it probably, I'm guessing that this vision goes all the way back to whenever the original resolution was drafted. But obviously, this idea of construction of permanent city-controlled housing for people that are either currently experiencing homelessness or at risk of experiencing homeless. One thing that Ian will speak about, and I think you'll probably get a better understanding when he comes up, is that there's a lot of different housing types that are out there. You know, I think of it as this ladder, and there's areas in that ladder that the private sector can deliver efficiently, and those housing products appear out on the market for people to take advantage of and purchase, you know, or live in. But there are areas in that spectrum or in that ladder where the market really doesn't deliver it can't deliver those housing products. And so those are the areas where I think the Housing Authority's approach to this project, they're really trying to deliver housing products in those areas. And so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on the specifics of these housing types. Ian can go into that, but really there are three types: supportive housing, public housing recapitalization. So the supportive housing is really intended for people who are potentially chronically homeless, need wraparound support services. Public housing recapitalization, think of that as existing public housing properties that we have that need reinvestment. And then workforce housing. Workforce housing, in essence, is housing that is needed in areas of the city which really, because of the economic conditions around those properties, it's almost impossible to provide housing that's affordable in those areas. But those same areas are the ones that have great access to transit and good jobs and good schools. And so really the goal of the Housing Authority is to really provide affordable housing in those areas. And so those are really the three categories of housing that this agreement really speaks to, or that the Housing Authority's plan speaks to. You can see the number of units that are anticipated. Those are obviously approximate, but that's what's currently planned, I think, as a part of this agreement. So I haven't brought the entire Oklahoma City Housing Authority response with me. It was, I think, a 200 or 300 page document, maybe not quite that big, but it was a very thorough response, and I've just provided an excerpt here from it. You can see the three housing types that are included in the agreement. This is really a table of all of the different projects, and they're obviously categorized by color to kind of communicate which type of housing product they're aimed at. And so that's really just a summary. Ian can go into a little bit more detail on these when he gets up and presents. But I wanted the group really to see, the board to see, really an overarching view of what this plan looks like as we enter into this first phase of work. So just a few highlights. As I mentioned, this is a little bit of an atypical agreement. It's not one that we've done a lot of. I think because of the way that the agreement is structured and the way that the Housing Authority will be executing these projects, we had to do it in a way that provided a lot of flexibility. But at the same time, we had to also structure it so that there was transparency and that the city understood exactly what was being done as the projects moved forward. And so you can see that in the agreement. You know, there's a section in the agreement which speaks to measurable benchmarks, which is required by the resolution. There's a reporting system that will be established according to the terms of the agreement, and then a quarterly report to the city as required. And so all of that language is in the agreement. It does have a 10-year term. There's options for renewal. Obviously, we would hope that we can get done and through all this work in 10 years. If there is some need to extend beyond that, there would be an ability to renew the agreement. One thing that the agreement requires is that the Housing Authority come forward with a plan for each allocation before those funds are made available. And so that's really what we're doing here. I mentioned the companion item on the agenda that's behind this. We are essentially trying to check that box for this first allocation. And so as allocation 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, as the Housing Authority is ready to execute those, they will come forward with really similar presentations, I think, for those for the city's consideration and approval. So there will be, so one of the things that's a little bit unusual about this is typically when we execute MAPS projects, we go through a site selection process, we identify exactly where it's going to be located. Because of the nuances of this agreement and the way that it's structured, there is a need to provide some flexibility on the part of the Housing Authority to identify project locations. Some of them are identified. You'll notice if you look in the agreement, the public housing recapitalization projects, those are existing properties that the Housing Authority operates or is part of. And so those locations have obviously been identified. The other two categories of housing, you'll notice like it will say supportive housing project one or project two, and that's because they really have not identified the exact location. The agreement has some exhibits in the back of it, which basically identify the areas that these projects will be located in. And so obviously you can dig into that if you're curious about where these are located, but really, again, trying to provide the Housing Authority some flexibility while also providing some transparency, I think, to the city in terms of where these projects would potentially be located. There are provisions in the agreement as it relates to workforce housing. Obviously, economic conditions can change, development patterns can change, and so it provides some ability for them to adjust that map based on various metrics, and those are identified in the agreement as well. Once the allocation plan is approved, so the allocation plan for allocation one that's coming forward today, assuming that the board recommends that to council and council approves it, really the operator is then authorized to expend funds. And so they'll go forward, they'll execute those projects. It's all based on the goals and objectives of the program, but really turns them loose to get started. The operator in the agreement will be responsible for securing any additional funding. One of the things that I didn't touch on in that summary table with the three colors on it, there was a column out to the right which indicated the anticipated leverage. So the city in no way is involved in going out and securing that funding and bringing that to the funding stack. That's all the responsibility of the Housing Authority. They're obviously very adept at that and are going to be responsible for that portion of it. They will be responsible for the management of all of the construction of these projects, and so that will be something that they will take on their shoulders. Again, one thing that I want to point out, this is a little bit atypical. As you might imagine, there's going to be architects and engineers and contractors and construction managers involved. The way the city standard process is we would go out and advertise an RFQ. We would select, bring that selection here, negotiate a contract. All of that responsibility is really moving to the Housing Authority. And so they have a process that they will go through. I would assume, and I think Ian would confirm this, it's all Title 61 compliant. Like they have the ability to select architects and engineers based on qualifications. They have a pool of pre-qualified construction teams, design teams that will help them execute these, and they will be responsible for selecting people from that pool and then obviously assigning them to projects. Once the projects are done, they will be operated and maintained by the Housing Authority. Ian will talk a little bit more here on the next agenda item about who those partners are, but obviously their response included some information in that regard. All the players you would probably anticipate that would be involved in supporting projects like this, and so they have really strong partnerships, and I would anticipate that that will be a big part of how these projects are operated in the future. So with that, I know I went through it pretty quick. That's the highlights. I would be pleased to answer any questions you have. I thank you for your time, obviously, this morning.
Any questions for Jason? Anybody have any questions? I've got a couple.
Sure.
So you said that this operating agreement is for 10 years. So what happens after 10 years?
Well, really all I was speaking to was the fact that they could renew it. If both parties agreed that it was in both parties' interest to renew it, that they would do that.
Okay.
David or Laura could probably speak to, the city, I don't think has the ability to enter into indefinite contracts. I don't know exactly what the requirements are there.
Yeah, that's basically right. Yeah, we just felt like longer term was appropriate for this because these projects don't get done,
right,
in 6 months.
Right. Well, and that's kind of to the point of my question, which is, to your point, we may be just finishing construction on the last one in 10 years, but we'll just hope it all goes well.
Yeah.
And then also on the locations that are still to be determined, will that be part of what is reported or part of the plan that is presented for the next set of allocations?
I think I might. So So the allocation plan that you'll be receiving today from me in the presentation, those projects where specific locations have not yet been identified, it's going to be very apparent when he presents it, like those locations have still not been identified.
Okay,
I'm not quite sure on the nuance of the agreement. I think he comes back, or they come back at some point.
So
authorize
the
that?
agreement allows them to pick a project within the defined areas in that exhibit. It says these are the approved areas that they can find property or buy property or,
okay, so the general location has been already identified, it's the specific land map, okay.
that's right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and part of the reason for that too is, the MAPS funds, it's a part of a much larger funding stack.
Right.
And so really, the MAPS funding is needed to put that stack together to even move the project forward and figure out if it's viable and if they can get legs underneath it. And so that's really part of the reason for that, I think.
Right. Okay,
So,
no, that makes sense. Okay.
All
Okay, any other questions for Jason? Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah,
We
you bet.
appreciate you being here. Okay. So is Ian going to go ahead and present now? No.
Depends on how you want to do it. I mean, we need to vote on that, or we can hear the other one and come back, however you want to do it, but they both need a vote.
Okay. So do we want to, why don't we go ahead and have
Hear the-
Ian's
Okay.
presentation? If you don't mind, Ian, maybe going a little bit out of order of what you expected, but
Right, so
Okay, and
now
then we'll
this
vote on
item,
both.
this item is for the specific allocation, the first allocation
Right.
of roughly 55 million, and you'll see that it's much more specific.
oh, great, okay. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Ian Colgan, representing the Oklahoma City Housing Authority. I was about to say that Jason did a great job and pretty much covered everything. I didn't need to come up and do anything, but I would like to talk about this program a little bit from our perspective, from the prospective operator's standpoint. So for those who don't know, the Oklahoma City Housing Authority is one of the largest housing authorities in the country and the largest in the state. On any given day, we manage 3,000 public housing units and about 4,500 housing choice vouchers, also known as Section 8 vouchers. So that's 7,500 plus households and 15,000 individuals, all of which holistically make an average of $10,000 per household. So the Housing Authority and its role really is a fundamental housing infrastructure piece to affordability in the city, as are most housing authorities across the country. For the MAPS homelessness program, we wanted to take this once in a almost generation opportunity of allocation of funds to provide a holistic approach to homelessness. And that came at a key time when I believe a lot of attention is focused on this matter, as well as the role of housing authorities in the place to solve it. And so that's why we have different areas of focus in terms of the different housing opportunities. So they're basically broken down into the three that Jason mentioned: supportive housing, public housing, and workforce housing. Supportive housing goes to the very notion that we are desperately in need of new housing units dedicated solely to those experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. You know, it's not just getting people directly off the streets, but it's people in lots of different situations, maybe that aren't even accounted for in the point in time count, that need stable housing and access to services. And that is what supportive housing is. And we propose to create a network targeting different types and needs and services of properties. We've proposed 500 and hope to produce more that will include on-site wraparound services through a housing first model that will place people in there, provide them access to services to where they need to go. And as Jason mentioned, the ecosystem of housing can be considered as a ladder where you can stay in such a type of housing, or you might reach a level of services that allow you to be more flexible in different types of housing, whether it's public housing through a Section 8 voucher, another affordable housing opportunity. So we want to be able to leverage the connectivity between that entire kind of ladder of housing. But just as much as new construction is crucial to this solution, so is the preservation of existing housing that also serves this population. And that is the public housing portfolio of about 3,000 units. Since the last 20 to 30 years, the amount of dollars allocated to public housing from Congress has declined precipitously to the point where, in our case, we were provided about $5 to $6 million from HUD to address $200+ million of deferred capital needs. The most recent public housing property was built in 1979, and and it goes all the way back to the 1930s. And none of those, because of this issue of funding, has received a holistic overhaul that is badly needed. That in multifamily is typically done about 15 to 20 years. We're pushing 50 to 60 years in some cases. Of course, roofs have been replaced, HVAC has been fixed, but we're talking about a holistic overhaul. Because if those properties don't get the capital they need for this deferred maintenance and capital needs, as we've seen in other parts of the country, they will go offline, and that housing is no longer needed. So it doesn't matter how many more units are we're adding. If we lose them, we're at a net zero. So preservation and addition are kind of two parallel tracks we want to focus on. A third is middle market workforce housing. As we worked through our proposal, we thought there was a lot of demand and focus on the increased unaffordability of a lot of neighborhoods, particularly in downtown and around downtown, that on one hand benefit from the massive investment of previous maps and just the general quality of life improvements that have been happening. But as those are built, the lack of affordability and affordable housing following that provides a opportunity gap where people may not be able to access the choice neighborhoods that we've created in the community. They also address more of a concept of not just affordable housing, but affordable housing in combination of transportation, because affordability is both where you can live and then where you need to go in terms of where you work and other things. So a component of this we wanted to add was a workforce housing portion that would target middle market housing for sale or rental in these high growth areas. So what we've proposed is 500 units of permanent supportive housing, the preservation of at least 1,500 public housing units, and I said 3,000 before, but there's possibility that we can leverage other funds to do the rest of our portfolio. So we're targeting really at least 1,500 and then 150 workforce homes. Jason mentioned this before, but one of the aspects of our proposal was that we did not want to be in a position where we're competing with the private sector. We want to allocate these funds in a manner, I think, as MAPS has done in the past, where it is a true public sector intervention to leverage other benefits, whether they're financial or social. And the areas of housing we've identified, the public housing, supportive housing, workforce housing, fall into what we term inefficient market delivery for the private sector. It either is not feasible to build those in the private sector, not profitable, or requires so much money from a public sector entity to get it done that the public sector and its partners might as well do it on its own. And so we really wanted to target these areas where we weren't saying, well, this developer or these groups, could do the same thing. We're doing a unique, government-focused intervention of the housing market to solve homelessness in a manner that, as we can see, from the lack of production of supportive housing and other aspects, has really fallen behind in this community because the private sector is unable to really produce it at scale. What's important in our program is implementation with our partners. So the Housing Authority would be the operator, but we would work closely with our own nonprofit and nonprofit partners to implement this program. So those include the Mental Health Association of Oklahoma, Homeless Alliance, and Pivot. And they'll play a crucial role in implementing, in particular, the supportive housing programs because they have lots of experience addressing, building such housing, focusing that housing on certain groups like those experiencing mental health barriers or youths aging out of foster care, and of course, the universe that is used to place people experiencing homelessness, runs through the city and the Homeless Alliance. So this is the partnership that we will be moving forward to implement. One of the interesting and I think unique aspects of this related to MAPS is that MAPS traditionally is, the city investing in big public sector works projects. And the Housing Authority, being a government agency, can kind of bridge between that city level policy goal and implementation at a nonprofit private level to secure property, secure funding the way that nonprofit developers would in a quasi-private manner, but all connected back to city control through our board there. So we can go out, secure property, work with contractors, kind of get the benefit of implementation of lower costs and more flexibility while having that direct connectivity to the city of Oklahoma City. One of the advantages the Housing Authority brings is its experience in housing management. So we already manage and asset manage thousands of units, one of the largest landlords in the city as well as the state. So we bring that expertise and work with residents who are low income or very low income. We propose to own all the properties, the Housing Authority through its subsidiaries, but that's one of the direct connectivities is direct ownership control, whether it's through direct ownership of a property or a ground lease with partners or something like that. But that plus asset management always ensures that there's control that goes all the way back to the MAPS program. And finally, one of the crucial pieces is rental assistance. So that would be Section 8. So for those who don't know, if you're on a Section 8 voucher, you pay about 30% of what your gross income would be. You could theoretically make no money and still get a house. That's crucial for the homelessness population because there isn't a lot of income in that group of people. So properties that are successful really need project-based rental assistance, and that is the resource that the Housing Authority can bring. It will layer the project-based Section 8 onto the properties, and that will allow people anywhere from 0 to 50% of area median income to live there. Without that, there would be no rental income, and you couldn't operate the property. You want to go through the allocation plan now? Okay, so all this funnels into the allocation plan, which is a manifestation of everything we've talked about. So first allocation plan, this is what we propose to start with right away, once approved. This includes 2 public housing properties, 2 supportive housing properties, and a couple of other administrative components. We'll go through these line by line for you. So Creston Park Phase 2 is part of a 550-unit redevelopment on the northeast side. The Creston Park Phase 1 is slated to start construction this summer, ideally, and we want to be able to make sure that's 170 units. And there's a replacement of 159 units of public housing. And we're going to create 550 units. So one of the aspects of MAPS in a lot of ways is not just unit by unit creation, but in opportunities like Creston Park, which is the redevelopment of 30 acres of former public housing, we can build more units. And we don't know exactly how that manifests itself over 10 years, but in the case of Creston Park, 2.5 million would replace 159 units and receive 550. So we want to make sure that Creston Park Phase 2 of 260 units can follow reasonably behind Phase 1. It includes a fairly large capital stack that we'll have to secure other funding for in addition to low-income housing tax credits and debt and things like that, but MAPS would go a long way to helping that move forward. Oak Grove Apartments is a 288-unit public housing property just south of the Dell campus and the river. Is one of our largest properties, and it's largest by the population. It was built about 1970, so again, needs a fairly large refresh. It's on, about 50 acres, so it really represents a community in of itself. Community center, 1 to 5 bedroom units. On the private market, it's almost impossible to find 4 and 5 bedroom units. This is one of the important aspects of preserving public housing, because once units like that are gone, they'll never be replaced. So we're proposing about $50+ million renovation of that property. That will also include a second phase with new units and other renovated public housing units. After this, both phases will be done, about 400 plus units being renovated or built. So it's a fairly large initiative, and we would propose about $1 million of MAPS money, leveraging another $50 million, again, in low-income housing tax credits and other sources. So those are two properties that actually have physical locations, and they're identified, and we've either started or about to start active pre-development and investment. And we've been working on these for quite some time, and they've been part of the Housing Authority's strategic investment plan since at least 2016. But examples of how MAPS can layer in, $1 million, $2 million is not a small amount of money, but the amount we can leverage and the benefit that could be leveraged from a neighborhood and citywide investment, I think are fairly apparent from those two projects. So supportive housing project 1 and 2, generic names. We would use the approval of MAPS money to go out and acquire properties that hopefully would yield between 75 to 100 units. It might, depending on how things lay out and the properties available, it could be more than 2 projects. We would leverage about 50% MAPS, 50% leveraged funding to do that. And that's where Jason was alluding to, the flexibility. What we need is, without approval or some predictability of availability of funds, there's no real project to go out and find. There's also no other money to leverage. With this money, we could go to the state, we could go to other federal, affordable housing sources and leverage the final amount, but the reverse is not really possible. So that's why these projects are discussed, in generality. These are goals. We would then go out, secure property and bring back the details of how they would manifest themselves, within the MAPS program. The pre-development fund of about, this is actually wrong, I think it adds up to 1.75 million, which is my mistake in here. Pre-development funds are numerous and add up to these real estate projects. So developers can expend millions of dollars in advance of closing on financing, architecture and engineering, market studies, appraisals, it all adds up. So what we want to do with the first allocation plan is to fund a revolving pre-development fund that will be used to pay for all those upfront costs. Those costs will then be reimbursed by the final capital stack, go back into the revolving fund and used for allocation 2 and 3 or 4. And at the very end, because we'd be done with all the projects, that money would basically collapse from the pre-development fund into a final supportive housing project, workforce housing project, what have you. It wouldn't stay in perpetuity. And then an additional $500-ish thousand for operator admin. There are obviously, staff at the Housing Authority that exist now, but will be needed to add to implement a program of this scale. It's a very large development program, and so that includes, project managers. Since we're in charge of construction managers, additions to our resident services department, so that we're building capacity and making sure the right supportive services are available, frankly, at all the properties we propose, not just the supportive housing. So that admin will be used primarily to help the Housing Authority get moving and launch and really get going. Because as you saw from the implementation plan, the first allocation was originally conceived to be 2021. We're obviously in 2023. Regardless of the timing, it's a 10-year program, but we'd really like to get started as soon as possible. And we think with this allocation and the time and effort we've put in thus far, we can get started fairly quickly and get this money out the door and get units, under construction or renovation. So that's the end of our presentation. Happy to answer any questions. I also have representatives from Homeless Alliance, Mental Health Association of Oklahoma, as well as other staff members as needed from the Housing Authority to answer your questions.
There we go. Sorry about that. Ian, thank you so much for your presentation. That was really helped fill in some holes of our understanding. And partner representatives, thank you for being here too. We appreciate it. So any questions of Ian? Yes, Russell.
I have a question about the leverage estimate.
Sure.
What are the sources of those and how secure do you feel that those will materialize?
So let's take Oak Grove Apartments for an example, okay? So Oak Grove I mean, the $50 million is actually from a financial model we've developed. It's not pulling out of a hat, just so that you know the level of effort we've put in so far. So one of the major sources would be low-income housing tax credits, in this case, the 4% tax-exempt program. That, in application with the state, and right now that is if you meet a threshold, that's a by right allocation of low-income housing tax credits. So for a $50 million project, we could leverage $20 million in tax credits. Then through rental income, we would probably leverage another $20 million in debt. So a first mortgage, initially issued through a tax-exempt bond, and then from a bank. And then the rest is the gap funding we need to fill. So all these big projects will have that gap. And so, partly it's MAPS. In this case, we have about $1 million of housing authority money we're putting in. We're also selling some land and using some proceeds. So each project is different. Available sources, include home and CDBG from the city, housing trust funds from the state, affordable housing program from the Federal Home Bank. So there's a set of programs out there, both locally and nationally, that developers typically use to do that. And, they can take a long time to assemble, and MAPS really helps, close the need to, in some cases, put 6 different additional sources down. These can be sort of complex, and when you look at the capital stack, they really start to add up. So we don't want MAPS necessarily to be all that gap, because we're trying to leverage as much as possible. But those are the typical sources that would be used in any public housing, LIHTC kind of deal. For supportive housing, it's a possibility. We've imagined some grant funding on top of the MAPS funding, housing trust fund dollars from the state, other things that are generally available and reasonably available. They're not just shots in the dark. There's also the 9% tax credit program that would leverage other equity on top of that, and that's been used all across the country to build supportive housing. So we're fairly confident about the availability, but part of the predictability of the long-term program is, we have a project, we know what MAPS funding we have, so we know exactly what other funding we need to go get. We may not spend the MAPS money right away. It might be later on in the construction project or something like that. It depends. But it's all predicated on, generally available and predictable sources that, they want to see you have your capital stack put into place before they'll put in. And MAPS on top of debt and equity really helps secure those other funds.
Thank you.
Other questions? Any other questions for you? Yes, Monique?
About, I guess my concern is some of the issues that the Housing Authority has been having in the last couple of years, and how quickly we can really see some change for the homeless, unhoused population we have right now. Because from what you have described, it doesn't seem as if any new available housing is going to be open for subsequent years.
Well, the supportive housing program is really going to be focused around acquisition of existing properties. And so that's what we would hope would come on board much quicker than the longer-term public housing ones, which require a lot more capital.
Okay, by much quicker, what is your estimate?
Well, with some identified funds on top of MAPS, we could have a property acquired and renovated in less than a year. We just need to look to see what's available, negotiate pricing, things like that. But without the MAPS funds, there's nothing to do for that. So once we start looking for those properties, securing the other funding, and then, creating that timeline.
So maybe provide some examples of existing housing like you did this subcommittee.
So, older Class C apartments or even hotels are primary targets that, are not as desirable within those markets and aren't, extremely expensive, but don't necessarily need a substantial amount of renovation. They're not shells. So they can be, part of the money is acquisition, part of it is light renovation to get those units up as soon as possible.
Monique? did you have a follow-up question? Or are you good?
Well, I have a lot of concerns here based on, because my idea, or what it had in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, is that we would see some immediate or fairly soon changes for our unhoused population. And I don't see that this particular allocation plan is going to help those that are currently unhoused. This looks more like a plan to help the housing authority revamp and change what they currently are offering, which is not what I thought this was meant to be.
Revamping is part of this, but the supportive housing is the targeted component that is meant to bring new units online. But real estate takes time. You don't go out and create units like this. We are looking and forming a plan to use our housing choice vouchers to better target existing people experiencing homelessness, so that there is a program up and running at a scale to help now. But this is a capital program, as are MAPS programs. And that means properties, real estate development, and that takes time. So there's, do I wish all this could be built, or all supportive housing could go out and be provided in 6 months? Yes, but that's not realistic.
Okay. And to your point, I do understand that, but the Creston Park housing is troubled at best, because some of those people were moved out, and and so I guess that's my thing. And so if you all were supposed to have some stuff started back in 2016, 2017, and we're now in 2023, and that is still not really moving forward, I have tremendous concerns with this MAP funding that the city is allocating for the unhoused.
I'm sorry, I'm unaware of your concerns related to Creston Park.
Okay, thank you.
That's a project, phase 1, that we had planned and could have been started last year and was delayed through no fault of the Housing Authority. So,
Okay.
That's something we're really trying to put together this year and get started, because it's been a long time and going through a lot of trouble to, assemble all that financing. But it's a really good example, phase 1, of all the funding that's needed to be allocated to this type of public housing redevelopment, which is not just public housing. It's other affordable housing. It includes 50% project-based vouchers, the same vouchers that will go into the supportive housing, and a center for services to serve those residents, 550 residents. It's not technically supportive housing because it's not designed for the housing first model, but it could be. And it's meant to be choice housing for people who may leave the housing first once they're more stable, or other residents who just need a place to live. And that property, just like all the other public housing properties, will have available services to help those residents succeed.
Any follow-up questions?
Yes, I have a few. Thanks for your presentation. First, I just wanted to share with the advisory board and with those in attendance from where my perspective arises. So I'm sure you saw in the Oklahoman last week where many of us went out. Well, let me back up in terms of that pronoun us. Many service providing agencies went out at about 4 o'clock in the morning to do Oklahoma City's annual point-in-time count. And this is where we go to shelters, encampments, panhandling sites, et cetera, to do a census on the number of people experiencing homelessness in our community, and to do a survey. It's about a 4-page survey. So I was one of 2 council members who actually went out on that point-in-time count. And 4 o'clock in the morning. I just want to walk you all through what that experience was and why I feel your sense of urgency, and then I'll just have some questions after these comments. So we went first to the Walmart parking lot because we have learned that many of our unhoused residents sleep in their vehicles in parking lots that are well lit. So that's one type of homelessness that I think we don't talk enough about. In fact, when I was knocking doors in the new part of Ward 2, the week before Christmas, there was an older couple in their 80s, but they were resting, and their daughter opened the door, and I mentioned, Maps for Park stuff. She mentioned she had concerns about loose dogs in the neighborhood. And then she went back to the parks and she goes, well, I've seen homeless people there. And I walked her through the Maps 4 program and street outreach teams and how Houston had reduced homelessness by 63%. And she goes, well, but what about people who don't want the help? And I walked her through what I have learned from folk like Dan Strawn at the Homeless Alliance. I've come to expect a series of responses once I give that answer to people about what about people who don't want help. But what I didn't anticipate that day was this woman's response where she said, well, what about me? I am homeless. So just imagine she's at the door in a home and she goes, I'm homeless. And it was like, what? And she said, I don't live here. This is my parents' house. They're just letting me stay here for Christmas. I sleep, she told me, in her truck in the Walmart parking lot with her dogs. So that was like a super jarring experience for me because so many of the calls we get in the Ward 2 office and emails are about encampments in drainage canals or I-44 in Penn or in Swadek Park, right? We don't get the calls about the people sleeping in their vehicles. But there she was. So I went back out to my car, got some Post-it notes, wrote down contact information for the Homeless Alliance, mentioned Dan's name, mentioned Mental Health Association. I'll never forget that experience because we just sat at her dining room table and I pulled up a Google image search of the Homeless Alliance so she could see for herself. She needed to see this facility because I think otherwise we're speaking too abstractly to a lot of folk who've been let down along the way. So I made it concrete for her. And then I told her, after giving her Ward 2's contact information, that if she had any difficulty navigating those two nonprofits, whether Homeless Alliance or Mental Health, to call us because we knew some folk, right? So that's one example. And so when we started our 4 a.m. drive and went to Belle Isle station, that made a lot of sense to me. And I wouldn't have understood why it made sense had I not knocked that woman's door, her parents' door. 2, then when we went behind Belle Isle Station, there was a woman, and I hope you're hearing me on this. I have been baptized by what happened last Thursday. I'm not being hyperbolic. I no longer have patience on this issue. I just don't. I barely did. There was a woman standing in wet cardboard scraps behind the loading dock in Belle Isle Station. She was standing in her shoes, but they weren't even all the way on her feet. She was standing on her shoes, Sheila from Mental Health Association did the first survey, asked her questions. Turns out she had escaped domestic violence. Turns out she hasn't been with her kids in years. Turns out even Palomar, where she had received services, she had kind of fallen through the cracks there. And she doesn't go to the shelters, she told us, because when they initially were going to send her and her kids to the shelters, she didn't trust that system, so she didn't go. And now she hasn't seen her kids in years. And anytime she thinks about going to a shelter, she can't, because in her mind, it's re-triggering the loss of her children. Can you imagine protection, the Maslow hierarchy of needs, the ceiling and the walls, but you won't go because it is a re-traumatizing thing for a mother whose kids are lost? I mean, oh my God, what? She asked us if we had feminine hygiene products. And thank God people like Sheila and Lindsay Cates and Melissa were in that SUV with us because I didn't have it. And I also just couldn't imagine being on our streets at 32 degrees in, again, wet cardboard scraps, and being a woman and not having access to just a fundamental monthly need. Oh my God, that's our people. And they're not bussed in. People are lying to our people about who our homeless residents are. I know many of y'all know that, but I just want it on the cameras. I want to say that. Because we asked the people in the survey, where are you from? Oklahoma City, they told us, or the cities around here, our towns. So that's our people. Then we went to 39th and Penn, the LGBT district. I met two gentlemen just huddled under blankets there around my age. We did their survey. I got their names mixed up briefly, and he goes, "No, I'm Daniel." And I made a point every moment from that second on to refer to him as Daniel. I don't like saying homeless people anymore. I really appreciated the way you all spoke earlier where you said people experiencing homelessness, our unhoused population. I think we really need to rethink the language when we speak. Then we went across the street to Casey's at Penn, and the same people we just surveyed, some man who was experiencing, I don't know what kind of mental health breakdown, but he was belligerent, and he was threatening Daniel and Thomas and Michael. Can you imagine? Who do you call when you're homeless and someone's threatening you? When my residents who are housed feel threatened by someone unhoused, they call me. And then I send out Lieutenant David Dale or Major Dan Stewart, and then I reach out to Homeless Alliance and Mental Health Association, who are unhoused residents calling. Who are they calling? Who are they calling? So we had to roll up beside him. I asked Lindsay to drive beside them, and I rolled down my window and I said, "Get away from that man. Nothing good will come from your interaction with this man. Nothing." I hope they heard me. Then we went under the bridge at I-44 in Penn. Can you imagine being woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning by someone saying, outreach, survey? Well, this man was very upset by that. I would be too. I'm upset when you wake me up at 7:30 a.m. in my bed. Ask my cat. So he didn't do the survey. Then I watched Lieutenant Dale climb down into the drainage ditch at I-44 in Penn to survey 6 folk who were down there. It's just, this is the city, and I think too many of us have distracted ourselves with brunch. It just almost broke me last week, and the only thing that keeps me going is the compassion of the majority of Ward 2 people, because most of the time when Ward 2 people are calling, they're saying, how can we connect them to the services? What are you all doing? And this is what we're doing, and this is what I tell them. So I just wanted to walk you all through those comments. Thank you for listening to me. That's just the culmination worth of 4 years worth of calls and emails I get. And God bless the people who call my office and say, arrest them. I just think of that woman behind Belle Isle Station. We would have arrested her. If she was traumatized before, what would that experience have done? Guys, I don't know. So, comments, thank you for listening to that. I haven't had a chance to speak to those experiences yet. I'll never get them out of my head till the day I die. What role will the street outreach teams the city is going to hire play in connecting people like Bianca and Daniel and Thomas, Michael, to these housing units.
I think Dan with the Homeless Alliance is better suited to speak to the system that will be used to.
Step right up, Dan. How are we going to connect people to these new opportunities?
Good morning.
Good
Thanks
morning.
for having me here. I'm Dan Strawn. I'm the exec and the founder of the Homeless Alliance. I didn't bring a prepared presentation, but you know, one of the things, your question, Ms. Bruner, is really pertinent because it's, as Ian said, this is capital money. But to get moving with the stock that we have now, we need operating funds, right? And so, you know, on March 7th, there'll be a presentation to members of the council of a plan to use home and ARPA funds to make the current system that we have now, which works really well, it's just not robust enough, right? So what happens with people like that is that you met, Councilman, is they'll get an assessment. And as a community, we've moved away from a waiting list model to a triage model, right? So in the ER, you know, you take the heart attack before the broken ankle, even if the broken ankle's been waiting. And so someone like that woman that you met, who's very vulnerable, floats to the top of that list. And so we are able to get them into housing more quickly because we have that assessment data. What we have found over the last couple of years is as the cost of rent has increased, the number of evictions have increased, and the rental market, especially at Class C and the lower Class B market, has gotten way tighter. Two things are happening. With the same amount of money that we're getting from the feds, we're able to house fewer people because the cost of rent has gone up. And landlords with a vacant unit are able to be much more discriminating, and I use that word intentionally, about who they rent to, because they know it's not going to be vacant very long. If they turn down my client or one of Mental Health Association's clients, a client without those issues will be in the next day to rent that apartment. And so while across the continuum we were able to move more than 12,000 people experiencing homelessness back into housing, inflow and lack of outflow is pumping up that current number. So I think to your question about what's going to help tomorrow, I think what you're going to see on March 7th is an attempt to answer that. But the ultimate answer is a lot more truly affordable housing. And like Ian said, that just takes time.
Thank you for sharing that interim plan, and that's really helpful to know that. That kind of helps, I think, but put more pieces together.
Gotta have both.
Yeah, you got to have both. So I appreciate you explaining and sharing with us the near-term plan as we're looking at more longer-term and permanent increase in volume.
And I wanted Dan to share that since you all, are familiar with him in a large case. The state also has $30 million of home ARP funding that they're about to allocate to rental assistance, to supportive housing, things like that. So, it's really an opportunistic time right now with the launch of Maps for Homelessness and this funding that came from the American Rescue Plan, and it's exciting that there are, things like this program or home ARP or the continuum of care, they can't do everything. We've got to plug all the gaps. And what this program fundamentally is an attempt to ensure that Oklahoma City does not fall behind, as every city community in the entire country has, in its inventory of affordable housing. particularly focused on the homelessness and those that make extremely low income, because that is infrastructure. Those are physical assets that, you know, the federal government or local governments create. And if this program weren't done simultaneously with some of those other opportunities, it would sacrifice that opportunity to really build not only these supportive housing, preserve existing public housing, which serves those residents as well, and take public housing assets and add more. Because, you know, this is really, maybe once in a generation is slow, but, you know, this doesn't come around all the time. So that's really where this is focused.
I have a few more, these are questions. One, to Russell's earlier inquiry, can we, and then I'm guessing the subcommittee, the community one, can we receive a list of the different partners or grants that we're intending to leverage? Like because when I always respond to people and say, oh, and we're going to take the 55 and leverage it into 400, and it sounds wonderful, but I think that will help I mean, I'm not going to tell everyone, here's this one, but I think having that.
Sure. It's actually in our proposal, but we can take that part out and just have that piece available to everyone.
No, go ahead. No.
Okay. So thank you for that. Two, I like that you're talking about these high cost sort of areas, and so something I'm very interested in are kind of two approaches there. I mean, other approaches I'm sure that you all are considering, of course, consider and take those approaches, but I think a lot about the upcoming bus rapid transit route on Northwest Expressway and Class, and I already see Dan nodding his head. So I'd like for that to be in consideration for where we would build that housing, because if someone can more quickly access the public transit, right, from their home, then they can get more quickly to recreation, education, and employment. Relatedly, Better Street, Safer City maps for, and then quite frankly, whatever, I don't know what funding mechanisms made the streetscape placemaking investments 20 years ago possible in Western District, the stuff in Bricktown. But I think since the city has already made these investments in streetscapes and placemaking in our city's historic corridors, right, to resurrect them, renew them, renaissance them, I think housing makes sense in those areas, because my grave concern, and I thought about it just this morning walking to grab an espresso in my neighborhood, Paseo. I was walking over to Holy Rollers, and I'm a renter there, and I can tell you I am terrified. I have recurring nightmares about waking up in an apartment not in the Paseo anymore. In fact, not even in Oklahoma City. It is a generally recurring nightmare that I have. And I worry about that because 75% of the folk who live, Economic Alliance and we did a study. Actually, if Daisy were here, she did the study. 75% of people who live in Uptown and Paseo area are renters. And I'm so happy that all the people come to visit us in the Paseo on First Fridays. I don't need them displacing my people. I don't. And so I'd like for some consideration in Paseo, in Uptown, the Asian District, Britain District, Clara Looper Corridor. Like, I think we should be very intentional at looking where has the city made investments? Because we have a stake then, right? And seeing those places not just continue to thrive, but honor the existence of people who've lived there previously. So to me, BRT and those districts.
I can't remember when you came in at the beginning of my presentation, but I think you're describing exactly the intent of that component. Okay. And something, I don't know if you've ever found, but I think you'd find interesting, is there's a website, I think it's called the Housing Plus Transportation Index. So it's an attempt to take the concept of affordability and expand it into the framework of both housing and transportation, right? And you might find it interesting noodling around it because it's a map, and you pin a location, you look at a neighborhood, and it's obviously from census data and the best that an analysis can do, but it adds that expected transportation cost to average employment areas and things like that. And that's something we're really looking to leverage over all these locations. Because it's not, so much of housing affordability is 30% of your gross income, these federal standards, and they work, but, where are they located? How much can you access, amenities and services that you need? And what's interesting about the index is you could locate, I don't know, you could be in Chicago or Phoenix or Oklahoma City, wherever, and pick a neighborhood, and it seems affordable, and then you click the button for transportation, all of a sudden you're like 80% of someone's income. You're like, whoa. And that, so focusing on transportation corridors, BRT, and in particular areas of city investment. I mean, the city invests in those areas to make them better neighborhoods, and that should be an opportunity for everyone.
Wonderful. Just a couple more. One, I'm sorry, y'all, I appreciate your patience on this. When we crafted maps it was so difficult because we were trying to, what Ian just said, we were trying to weave it all together. It was the transit with the walkability, with the bikeability, with the housing, with the mental health. I mean, it was a doozy. Right now, as you all know, we have a program through planning of a housing down payment assistance program. And that involves financial literacy classes as well. And I have residents in Ward 2 who've gone through that and now are en route to owning a $120,000 home, right? But my understanding is that that's all through HUD, and that the city, we can't, through our general fund, by charter, we can't put more money in there because that would be considered a gift. So I just looked at it legal, and they're like, yeah, that's right. So I'm curious though, there's two things happening there. One, the people managing the down payment assistance program and that financial literacy, those classes tell me that A, it's underutilized, but then B, I'm guessing if we were to better promote it, there'd be more people wanting access to it. So I need help from you all with this to do those sort of, what can we do? Are there ways to leverage what the city's already doing that we just don't know about? And how can we, as an advisory board, promote that through our respective channels? Because this is that old bootstraps thing people like to talk about. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Okay, well, let's give them the tools to do so. And to think that in a K through 12 system, we're taking classes about financial literacy is to not be true. And so I think we have an opportunity. So that's one thing I'm curious.
So one of the reasons you don't see workforce housing in the first allocation is because there's a lot of work to do. And a lot of that work is exactly what you described. It's bringing together not only the real estate component, but the financial literacy, the down payment assistance, all the resources, at least for sale housing. We hope to do both rental and for sale. But since you're talking about down payment assistance, we'll talk for sale. It's an ecosystem. And I'll use a city I'm familiar with, Indianapolis. They have a nonprofit dedicated to bringing all those resources together for that very purpose. And we don't have that here. That doesn't necessarily mean we need a whole other organization to do that, but I think those are conversations to have given this availability of funding, given underutilization, given this concept of really pushing the workforce housing, middle market housing is it does take, and I think one of the downsides to the local ecosystem is one organization has the down payment assistance and one has the financial literacy, and then they might be just out on their own to find housing as opposed to having supply available through, housing authorities, instrumentality or whatever, through marketing and things like that. They know where to find it. They know it's affordable. So that'll take a little bit of time. And, we see that. I think we can use the next couple of years to create that ecosystem so that when we request money for the workforce housing program, we know it's going to be more successful.
Can you this year report back to us what that plan would look like?
Absolutely.
That would be beyond helpful for me, and I think it would go some ways to alleviating some of our concerns about our folk needing to access this and being able to explain how to. My final question, and this is also to Dr. Bruner's concern, I think. As we build these maps for sidewalks, my understanding is there will be maps for imprint, right?
Right.
And with many of the projects. I think a way to ensure quality you know, just as we're doing with the sidewalks, to be able to say, just like the WPA made this building endure, MAPS projects endure, I'd like to see, are we planning on any sort of MAPS 4 branding on this housing? So it becomes that reminder to us all that the people living here are MAPS 4 people.
Yes.
We can certainly do that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You've got the little emblem ready to go. Yeah.
That's it for now. Thank you for your patience through that.
Any other question? Oh,
I do have one more thing. I just want the members of the advisory board to understand that a year ago, when we were looking at the implementation plan, we delayed approving the implementation plan for several months just because I made the point that our unhoused needed help now and to move this particular segment up on the implementation plan. And I'm disappointed in the presentation today as it doesn't seem to have anything immediate or having this urgency that we help those that are unhoused. Because as cold as it was last night, as cold as it's been in the last week, can you imagine being out on the street with no place to go? And so I want us to think about that while we are warm and cozy in our beautiful homes that we enjoy, whether we are buying them or we are renting them. It is definitely a privilege that everybody on this advisory board has that those out there do not. And I do not believe that this particular plan is the one to really help those unhoused. Now, don't get me wrong. I totally get the idea that we need to have some infrastructure and we have to build on what we have. But the Housing Authority has been here for however many years. They should have been working on that. And that's not our concern as to what the problems are for the Housing Authority, not our concern. This MAPS money is for specifically homelessness. And I don't believe this gets it. While it's really close, we're not even talking about the supportive housing projects 1 and 2 even really coming online yet. You know, the first expense is going to be this phase 2 for Creston Park and then Oak Grove Apartments.
It's not a priority. It's just a list.
Okay, well,
So there's no number 1 through 5.
okay. It's no number
Sorry.
1 through 5. I get that. But the fact that it's 75 and 100 projected units for the supportive housing, which is what I guess my understanding, and maybe I am wrong, and I'm often wrong, but those supportive housing is what could really maybe get people off the street today.
I agree.
So I just wanted to give my 2 cents. I feel very strongly about this because I see a lot of unhoused on a regular basis, and it's so hard. And while I do have some working partners that try to help get people, particularly students, off of the street and living in their cars, it is difficult at best to find something. And so I just want you to think about that. Thank you.
And on that note, to Dan's earlier point, March 7th, 8:30 to 11:30 a.m., OKC Convention Center. That's when we're going to do the council workshop on homelessness. So again, 8:30 to 11:30 a.m., March 7th, OKC Convention Center, because that's where we're going to hear City Manager Freeman, Lindsay Cates, Assistant City Manager Aubrey McDermott unveil what eventually will be a plan to get to this more immediate need to complement our MAPS 4 work. So I would just invite anyone who has the ability to attend so that we can kind of hear how that works with what we're doing. So,
Right.
thank you.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
I do want to also respond sort of along the line of Dr. Bruner. I had a very different picture of how MAPS 4 was going to approach homelessness and a more immediate impact. However, in the context of the resolution, it puts boundaries, specifically housing first. That's a critical explanation of how we can function. There are a lot of different approaches to homelessness. Housing First is one. The resolution binds us to Housing First. A second thing is that our work would be through a governmental agency. So now we're depending on the governmental agency to work with the numerous nonprofits and expecting that to happen. But we are bound to a governmental agency, and as a result, there is only one applicant to be an operator, and that is Oklahoma City Housing Authority. So with those parameters that have been placed on us by the resolution, the subcommittee heard these, and also an understanding, and I don't assume that I got any understanding ahead of anybody else. Although I've worked through my affiliation with then Capital Baptist Association and a shelter that we operate in the stockyards, I was forced to a very quick tutorial of trying to understand homelessness in Oklahoma City. But effective homelessness always has to look at a more holistic approach. It is not simply a facility or a room for somebody to stay in. There are a lot of factors to effectively eliminate the housing needs as well as the emotional needs, the feeling of security that people need, all of those factors. So while I wish we could just buy and renovate a hotel and fix it, have a place for everybody, effective homelessness response is such a much bigger issue, concern for us. And I was very pleased within the parameters we've been given through the resolution. I was very pleased, and that's why and not just that I was pleased, but the members of the subcommittee were satisfied with what we've heard within the parameters we have to work with. And that's why we brought this recommendation forward.
Thank you, Harry. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Ian, thank you for your time. Thank you for your presentation. And Dan, thank you for jumping in there and answering a few extra questions. No slideshow necessary. Yes. Okay, so we'll go back to item 2D, recommend approval of MAPS 4 homeless program operating agreement among the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority, the City of Oklahoma City, and the Oklahoma City Housing Authority.
I move approval.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have?
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Okay. Got it? Okay. Thank you. Moving on to item 2E, recommend adoption of resolution granting $10,762,400 for the MAPS 4 homelessness to the Oklahoma City Housing Authority. I take a motion in a second. If there are no questions, I take a motion in a second. Okay, we have a motion. Shay, second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. And I appreciate very much the robust conversation. This is an issue that clearly is very important to our community, and I think it's the importance of it is reflected in the conversation that we're having this morning. So thank you for being in tune with all of our neighbors. Moving on to item 3, discussion items. Do we have any other items?
I have a couple things. We have today the revised implementation plan for everybody that has the revised numbers in it that we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Has the revised numbers. I think 2 of you have already got them.
Do you need any more?
No, I think we're good.
That's it, okay.
So the book is essentially the same with the exception of the numbers and then removal of the Freedom Center, which was voted on. Then also, I want to report that park outreach continues. They're very active right now and having their meetings. Same thing with the BRT outreach meetings. Palomar and Diversion Hub are both in their space planning efforts, and that's going well. Animal Shelter just kicked off this week as far as design, and sidewalks are in design right now. I'm sure there's others, but I can't think of it right now.
So lots of activity.
There is a lot of activity behind the scenes. You'll start seeing some presentations on progress on those as we get to a point where we feel like it's worth bringing up.
Okay, outstanding. Any other discussion items?
Yeah, and just to add on to what David said about the parks, I did attend last Saturday's at Claire Looper, and it was very well attended, and I appreciated all of the outreach that is being done by our architecture firm to gather people's feedback. And so there was a lot of robust feedback, but I do encourage everyone to go to their local park meeting group. I think the next one is this Thursday, February the 9th at Sellers. They'll start all the South Side parks this round. So please continue to reach out to your neighborhood associations, the different groups that typically utilize those parks around that area. It's much appreciated.
Okay. Thank you, Jessica.
One other thing I forgot to mention, the Coliseum groundbreaking on the
Yes.
22nd.
Yes. 11 o'clock.
11 o'clock, yeah.
Okay.
There'll be a light lunch.
Yes.
I can't promise that it won't be cold, but I'd like to see all of you there.
Yes. Please do attend if you can, although that's a shared project between MAPS 3 and MAPS 4. I think it's still important and exciting for us as our first groundbreaking. So moving on to item 4, comments by board, staff, and citizens. Did we have any citizens signed up? Okay, great. Any other board comments?
Just to say thank you to Director Todd and more recently the Gooden Group for sitting with our OCU students to talk about the beautification. Specifically, there's the OCU corridor that they've listed, and so their student government president, Brianna Shaw, sat with us, and she's going to be connecting us with more students on campus. That was a recent Zoom call with the Gooden Group, and then Director Todd came in about a month ago and spoke with some of their leadership there, and we received an email. I don't know if you got it.
Yeah.
Brianna said that was the best thing of the whole year, you coming out there. Can you
Wow.
imagine someone? No, I'm not
David,
kidding.
You're
Can
the
you
best
imagine a
thing.
student?
You're the best thing of the year.
Get out more.
So thank you.
Well, thank you then for representing MAPS 4 Citizens Advisory Board so well. We appreciate that. So, okay, there's anything else? Okay, if there's nothing else for today, thank you all so much for being here, braving the weather. Stay warm, enjoy the weekend, and we are adjourned.
I think what those kids mostly enjoyed was me showing them how things used to be